Hi all, I thought we could revisit today a fantastic attacking masterpiece. This is the game of Nezhmetdinov. He was playing against Chernikov in the 1962 Sicilian Team Cup competition. So Sicilian was kind of treated as one of the fathers of the Soviet chess school. So in this team competition, which was being played at Rostov-on-Don, a port city in the southern federal district of Russia. Let's see what happened in this game. So 1962, e4 from Nezhmetdinov. We have the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, knight c6, d4. Rashid is not afraid to use the open Sicilian. C takes, knight takes, and now we have an accelerated dragon g6, which does mean, because pressure has not been put immediately on e4, that white could have the luxury here of playing c4 with a Maroczy bind on d5. So this is a very, very popular option here. But Nezhmetdinov uses knight c3, and he's in good company. Bobby Fischer later has played knight c3 here as well. Bishop g7, so hitting that knight on d4, that's protected. Knight f6, and then we have bishop c4, black castles, and the bishop just drops back. And in fact, we are following also a Bobby Fischer game here, and there's a classic Bobby Fischer trap variation, which, just as a reminder if you haven't seen it, so knight a5 was played against Bobby Fischer by Samuel Rzewski. They were great rivals, and unfortunately this runs into an amazing trap, e5, knight e8, and can you see what white plays here? This is like Bobby Fischer trap in this line. Okay, bishop takes f7 check, because after king takes there's knight e6. That pawn is pinned on d7. So this is actually winning. If the king takes here, then the king is dragged out until checkmate, for example, like this. It's going to be checkmate. So the fantastic Bobby Fischer trap exists with knight a5. So, but here we see knight g4. Common is d6. This is more common, this continuation, where black can actually play quite aggressively with b5, and it's thought to be still a small advantage for white. So anyway, knight g4 here, and this is taken. We have knight takes d4. Now, modern GMs have actually played this position with queen d1. That seems to be fairly popular in this position, to just retreat the queen back to d1. One of the highest level game examples so far is Tryfon against Mantovani in Ischia 1998. So that was a win for white with queen d1. You might want to check the pinned comments for that reference game. But here we have queen h4, and now queen a5. This is quite a sharp move. It basically encourages white to castle here, and castle kingside looks a lot safer in this position than queenside. If white spends another move in the center, for example like this, then knight takes c2 check, and there's this unfortunate situation with the rook on a1 hanging, for example this, and it's a bit of a disaster. So it sort of prompts white to castle here, and now we have bishop f6. And the story goes actually that Chernikov, being very confident here that he could just get a draw actually by repetition, and Nezhmetdinov started taking a long time over this next move. In fact, it's rumoured that Nezhmetdinov took about 40 minutes to play his next move. So he obviously was attracted to something and wanted to really explore it further, something very, very committal, and not necessarily following a draw path. Now, a draw path here could happen with, for example, queen h6 and a repetition, because the problem is on queen g3. Can you see what black has in this position? Okay, black has queen takes c3, and then that knight in the center goes to e2, it's check, and then this is just very, very good for black. So that's just yeah, a bit of a disaster there. And also, if here we have the same kind of thing here on queen f4, then there's queen takes c3 again with the idea of knight e2 check. So there's a lot of nice tactics for black with this queen a5, it seems. So what was all this thinking about if it wasn't this repetition draw? So let's go back to the position. Why had Nezhmetdinov taken 40 minutes? And in fact, an excited little boy ran up to Chernikov apparently with an exclamation for this next move, which Nezhmetdinov, I wonder if you can guess, if I give you 5 seconds, what would you play here? Okay. Yep. Queen takes f6. The exclamation of the little boy was, "Mister, he sacrificed his queen to you," apparently. So, Chernikov returned back and was stunned. But not so stunned as to automatically recapture here. In fact, Chernikov played quite a resourceful move. If he actually took, just with the automatic recapture, e takes f6, then bishop takes d4. Actually, it seems visibly as though white has some good compensation. So Chernikov was in the right frame of mind here to actually throw in an intermediary check to take things off balance a bit, that this knight's been deflected back. So we have knight takes e2 and now e takes f6. However, things are kind of restored with knight c3. The knight is still heading for that key d5 square, and there's still some visible compensation for the queen. But technically, yeah, it's just two pieces. Two minor pieces have been given up. We're actually equal on pawns. So is this really enough? However, there's a big factor of piece coordination and central pieces against f6. Rook e8 was played, knight d5, which safeguards the e4 pawn. If rook takes e4, then there's knight takes f6 check, winning that rook. So the knight's starting to take care of things on d5, and it's going to be a while before it can be actually attacked. We have rook e6 being played. On king g7 here, we're going to have a similar position to the game in any case. So rook e6 here, we have bishop d4, king g7. So we get this position. And how does white exert more pressure? Well, rook ad1 with a big idea now of a rook lift. For example, like this, to put more pressure on f6. So there's a lot of pressure mounting up on f6 here. d6 is played, now rook d3. Bishop d7. This is interesting. If we look at this position, it's already pretty tricky. If a6 here, then knight takes rook f3. This position is very, very pleasant for white. It's technically a nice advantage for white. So we have bishop d7, rook f3. Yeah, here it's slightly different. If knight takes, rook takes here, then maybe this is a better chance for black. So rook f3, just keeping the tension, keeping the pressure for a moment, and letting black have the possibility of playing an inaccurate defensive move. And in fact here, black is prompted to play what seems to be one of the less accurate defenses. Bishop b5 was played. A fascinating position to analyse. There's actually two target pawns here which are revealed in the key variations. If black tries rook c8, knight takes, and say king f8, knight takes d7 check is very good. And if rook takes here, rook takes, this is very dangerous. If we look at this position, the coordination of the bishops and the rook is staggering. And in fact here, bishop e6 maintains this bishop. And here, there's going to be nasty stuff going on. A nasty discovered check from the bishop and also hitting the queen. So this is winning for white a big advantage. So a fascinating variation with rook c8 as an alternative. Now, so this is a 19th move. If rook e5 here, bishop c3, white has a small edge. On king g8, then knight takes f6 check. And this position is should be even actually. White has to play very accurately here. Again, not taking on f6. The key seems to be to keep the tension going with rook d1 here. And it seems in this position actually d6 could be a valuable target. So very, very surprising deep moves in this variation where white is very calm and just aligns to d6. This is one of the big secrets about this game, which makes these games worth revisiting. This line here is very, very subtle. Queen c6, f3, and black has big difficulties. For example, if f5, rook c3, this to win the exchange potentially, or just dent black's position or win the queen here. This is a fascinating line, winning the queen here. So you might think, well, black wasn't forced to do that. Well, it's very, very tricky. Yeah, if we look at this. If queen a5 instead, then check, rook takes e4, hitting the queen, rook takes d6. This variation shows actually, yeah, black cannot take here because of rook e8 checkmating, rook d8 checkmating. So white is able to get a very, very good position here potentially with a pleasant advantage. So fascinating, but bishop b5 may be a slight inaccuracy. Bishop c3 attacking the queen. The queen goes to d8 here. Queen a6 is an interesting alternative. Well, that runs into knight c7. This position at least reduces some of the tension, but it turns out that white should be having a small edge here. So the queen went back to d8. We have knight takes f6. And now interesting here, if rook takes f6, again, just maintaining the pin, celebrating the pin, with rook d1 is best. So for example, king g8, then taking on f6. This position is really nice. There's ideas emerging here which are really strong. So that's actually stronger than taking on f6. This position is still very nice for white as well. So anyway, bishop e2 was tried. Now, Nezhmetdinov to play here. Can you see what white plays in this position? If I give you 5 seconds. Okay. This is a really fantastic undermining move played in this position. Knight takes h7 check, which is not what you might think. Bishop e2 was actually designed for resources not just hitting the rooks, but for a bishop h5 defense. So it's not actually with the view of rook h3 check, because if king here, then rook h8 is checkmate. But the snag is, yeah, rook takes f7 is the move. The snag is here that there's bishop h5. And this is actually going to be better for black, potentially. Yeah, this is nothing for white. So that's not the idea, actually. The idea is beautiful. And it's, say, king takes, then there's rook takes f7 check. The idea is actually to undermine that rook on e6. And here, after bishop takes, we have beautiful coordination demonstrated. Bishop g7 check. Bishop f6 check. Bishop takes d8, white has a big advantage. And in this position, if king g5, then there's a beautiful line, f4 check, g4 check, king h4, and now bishop f6 check, and again, not what you think to take the queen, by the way, but rook h7 is checkmate. And on queen takes f6, then rook h7 is immediately checkmate. Look at that king trapped in this line. So very, very beautiful tactic, knight takes h7. So not with the idea of rook h3 to h8, but rook takes f7. Fantastic stuff. We have king g8. And now rook h3. So there are some echoes of trying to mate with a rook on h8 here, guided by the bishop. So that coordination point, the h8 point, is of great interest to white here. We have rook e5 being played. Let's have a look at bishop takes f1. Knight g5 is possible, because if queen takes g5, let's have a look. If queen takes g5, then there's rook h8 checkmate. And the knight's also looking at some key squares here. If rook e7, then that's checkmate. If rook e5 here, then knight takes f7 is devastating, actually hitting the queen and rook. Here, knight takes e5 check, for example. Knight d7 check wins the queen there. If f6, then bishop takes e6 check, and white is scooping up a lot of things after knight f7 check. Yeah, this is just absolutely winning. So very, very beautiful lines if bishop takes f1. So perhaps quite wisely, rook e5 to try and blunt this bishop, and say to the rook, you're not coordinating with this bishop on c3 at least. But it's nudged carefully with f4, trying to nudge that away. Now we have bishop takes f1. On rook h5 here, knight f6 check is strong. For example here, knight takes h5, then knight f6, and this is just going to be a very, very big position after bang, bishop takes f7, exposing the black king. And now here, after knight d5 again, there's a big threat of rook e7 checkmating, and if rook e8, then there's knight c7 checkmate. So very, very beautiful variations here on that rook h5. And if we just have a look at that again here, on queen takes f6, we just take that. This is a very big advantage for white. The two bishops are more than adequate for the rook. So we have bishop takes f1 in the game, king takes, rook c8, and white's position is super strong. It looks as though black is threatening rook takes c3. It turns out white's position is already super strong here and winning. White could actually play f takes e5. For example, rook takes, then that check is avoided by the pawn temporarily, supporting knight f6 check. And here, this is absolutely crushing. That's checkmate. So it turns out this is just really, really strong. If d takes e5, then rook d3, this position, this is really strong, because believe it or not, the queen is being kind of checkmated. So again, we're back to the two bishops against rook scenario. So some very fascinating variations here. Yeah, this rook h3 is coming in here, potentially. So it turns out f takes e5 is already winning, but bishop d4, preserving the bishop, is also very strong and winning too. b5 was played. On rook, if the rook ever moves, for example, if rook e7, then knight f6 check, knight e8 check is a beauty, because it's a double check, and say king f8, rook h8 checkmate. So b5, we have knight g5, rook c7. Yeah, anytime the rook takes, just as a quick recap, then there's rook h8 checkmate. So rook c7, but now another fantastic mini combination by Nezhmetdinov. White's play, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here with white? Okay, white's play here plays bishop takes f7. Fantastic shot. Now, rook takes f7 was played in the game. Let's have a look what happens on other possibilities. If king g7, this runs into knight e6 check. You can see that the rook is pinned, can't take the knight, and the knight's just fault king and queen. So for example here, and this is with check, so that's absolutely winning, we've taken the rook after. On king f8 instead, then strongest is actually here in this particular position, rook h8 check. For example here, just taking on e5 temporarily is absolutely menacing. That's absolutely crushing. For example here, taking with check and then taking the queen. So there's all sorts of really crushing possibilities here. But also simply, knight e6 is strong. Here with a big advantage as well. Black is pretty helpless in this position. So rook takes f7 in the game, and now the point is rook h8 check. So this is a bit similar actually to one of my favourite Tigran Petrosian sacrifices against Boris Spassky, where Petrosian had done a queen sack on h8 for knight f7 to regain the queen. Right here, okay, it's a rook sack. King takes was played. On king g7, this is very strong. Rook takes d8. For example here, white's just going to end up a knight up. So the king took, knight takes f7 check, and after knight takes d8, white has two minor pieces for the rook, which is a big advantage in this ending. Rook takes e4, knight c6 holding the bishop, check, king e2, and actually Chernikov was quite generous. He actually resigned here. Maybe there's a few more moves left in the position to check out. For example, okay, let's find a winning plan though as an example. White could eventually just freeze black's queenside pawns, and then the two minor pieces will be overwhelming. This kind of position, for example, is a Zugzwang here. If we reach this position with a beautiful blockade on d4, say here, then taking the pawn, that's absolutely winning. But anything else, you know, black, for example, is crumbling here. Rook b6 or rook b8, they both fell here in this scenario. Knight f5 check, picking up the rook, or here, knight c6 check, picking up the rook. So eventually, once black's queenside pawns are frozen, that's going to be it. But it was a bit of a generosity, you know, ending the game here after that brilliancy. And it is one of the most astonishing games to me in chess history, and really got me interested in Nezhmetdinov. I'd like to share a few quotations actually about him. This first one: nobody sees combinations like Rashid Nezhmetdinov. That was Mikhail Botvinnik said that. The greatest master of the initiative, Lev Polgiavsky. His games reveal the beauty of chess and make you love in chess not so much the points and high placings, but the wonderful harmony and elegance of this particular world. That was Mikhail Tal. Rashid Nezhmetdinov is a virtuoso of combinational chess. That was David Bronstein. And remarkably, a year before this game, in 1961, Mikhail Tal had actually the best-known game in that tournament in 1961, the USSR Championship, 29th. There was a game in round 15 between Mikhail Tal and Nezhmetdinov. And Nezhmetdinov won the Brilliancy Prize for his tactical masterpiece, and earned his name in that tournament, the Evergreen Rashid. And years later, Tal told a journalist that that loss was the happiest day of his life due to the beauty of his opponent's play. That game is also video annotated on this channel. So this is a real artist of the chessboard, and I thought this game was worth a revisit in a little bit more detail. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. And if you did enjoy it, please check out the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member of chessbowl.net. And you can see all the updates to this analysis on the improved Learn from the Masters menu, or play other YouTubers. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, subscribes appreciated. Thanks very much.